So he wrote an article back in 2010 about fluid grids. And for those of you who don't know, Ethan, he coined the phrase responsive web design. He made it popular. I have some references to him. He's kind of like the godfather of responsive web design, at least in my opinion. He's talking about fluid grids, and this is where it's really important. Fluid grids, they help us break out of a reliance on the minimum screen resolution. You know the old days when we used to put on a website, this site best viewed in 1024 by 768? Those days are over. We have to forget about those days. We have to forget about even thinking about resolution. Because the whole concept of thinking about screen resolution and what do people use, what size of browser, what blah, 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 forget all that. Those days are over. It's a big paradigm shift, but we have to forget about that if we want to move forward with our websites. And the really cool thing about this, and this is where we get more philosophical, fluid grids help put control of our designs. And how scary is that from a designer point of view? I know a lot of designers that love pixel perfect control, but fluid grids put control of the designs firmly in the hands of our users and browsing habits. So already we're like, okay, here's a website, I'm going to create it, and I'm going to kind of want it to look like this, but you know what, you can change it all you want. That's kind of... and a little off script here, but as an example, is anyone here familiar with Pocket? Used to be known as Read It Later? One person.
Used to be known as what?
Read It Later. Okay, this Pocket is this little service that's available online. It's an app you can get for mobile phones. And if I can do this here, oh, of course, we have a SSL error with Microsoft's network.
It strips everything out so that all you get is the text and very clearly on a page. So all your neat stuff is gone.
Well, my cool demo just failed on me, but yes, that's exactly right. What this app does, and many apps out there do, is they'll go to your website and they'll strip out the content from your design. So you've already lost control of your design. That's happening today. So fluid grids are one way to allow that to happen, and you kind of facilitate that happening. And we're going to get into that more even deeper. So we're going down the rabbit hole philosophically a little bit more. Yes?
Ask you about, so your point basically is it's in our users' hands if they're
Yes.
using whatever device they're using.
Yes.
But we can learn how to control a little bit of, it's like RTF back in the old days, where we could make things bold or italic, you know, but it's a text file.
Yes.
I'm not saying that that's what it does. I'm saying that the end result is we can control so that it looks nice.
Yes.
When it's in readability.
Yes.
But we have no control. I just had a client scream at me because I had images and he thought they were going to shrink into
Gotcha.
readability.
Well, actually, we'll talk about images in a couple of minutes here, but another way I would describe it, fluid grids allow you to optimize the user experience. That's the way I would sum it up. They're necessary. They're absolutely necessary, and it's a great segue to this slide. Fluid grids, they help you accommodate what happens between the media queries, between the breakpoints. So with media queries, we set different breakpoints, is what they're commonly referred to. Sometimes, commonly people use pixels. Hopefully today you'll leave here and you will never use a pixel again. But most people use pixels or traditionally been using pixels. You're all going to leave here using IMs. You'll see.
They do the fixed design.
Well, yeah, and you think of it, we have these different points of screen resolution. So traditionally people think of 320 pixels, or 480 pixels, or 720 pixels, something like that, or 40 IMs, 50 IMs, 70 IMs. But we're thinking about fixed dimensions at that point. However, what happens between those dimensions? What happens at 370 pixels? Well, that's what a fluid grid does. It allows your website to automatically adapt to those situations when you're between those resolutions, those breakpoints with your media queries. An added benefit which is related to that is they actually help future-proof your design. So a couple of weeks ago, I saw something online about a new 5-inch tablet. So, for example, it's back to the, it's bigger than this, smaller than this. Chances are good it will introduce a different screen resolution. So what happens to your old responsive website? Well, if you're using a fluid grid, it will just kind of squish in there and everybody's happy. No one will notice. So fluid grids help you future-proof your design. And we'll be talking about more fluidity and proportion, beautiful buzzwords and keywords that we have to adopt and love. Calculating the fluidity, and this is hard to see. Is there anyone here that knows how to turn these lights off? Oh, you know, I knew you'd know.
Except this room isn't programmed the same way as...
There we go, much better. Is that better? Okay, so here is a very simple equation that, once again, this presentation's online, so don't worry about jotting it down necessarily, but it's target divided by context equals result. So this is from Ethan's article he wrote 2 years ago about fluid grids. This is his example. The context, or the container is 844 pixels. This is the comp the designer gave us. The designer's designing in pixels. And so our entry class main is 700 pixels wide. So we divided 700 divided by 844, which gives us 82.938%. Simple math. But what we just did here is we took a fixed layout, a fixed grid, we made it fluid. Very, very simple math. Once again, fluid grids do not mean grid systems. All it means is you need to just think fluidity, think proportion when you create your layout. Now, even if you're not working with responsive web design, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you start using fluid grids even on fixed width layouts. So your outer container could be 960 pixels, but your main column might be 23%. Your sidebar, 15%, or whatever. I highly recommend this for a number of reasons, but for most importantly, you start thinking about proportion and fluidity. The other cool thing about that too is if you do create a fixed width website with a fluid grid internally, and in the future the client says, well, it's so small on the page now, say, okay, you widen the outer container, boop, you're done. But definitely start using fluid grids even on fixed width layouts. Flexible images. So who here thinks what will happen if I put a 400 pixel image in a fluid grid and I shrink my page down? Yes?
It doesn't shrink.
It doesn't shrink. It breaks. We have a train wreck. Back when Ethan Marcotte. I'm going to get it. By the end of today, by Ethan Marcotte, when he first wrote his article in List Apart back in April 2010 about responsive web design, he focused mostly on text. Now, the thing about text, text is like water. It just flows around everything. It's beautiful. It's just, it in its own nature is fluid. It works great. However, when you stick a fixed width element like an image in a fluid grid, things break. So the way Ethan Marcotte put it is working with non-fixed layouts can be more difficult when you introduce fixed width elements like images. So we have a problem. How do we solve it? So Ethan, he did a lot of research. He looked at a lot of other people's research, and he came up with a beautiful, eloquent solution. One line of CSS. Okay, it's 3 lines because if you format it nicely. Image and object if you're dealing with Flash. Max width 100%. Now, of course, you have to omit the width and height attributes of your image tag. But what this does, by using CSS, we're telling the browser this image cannot be greater than 100%. That's awesome. That's great. We have flexible images. The only problem with this approach is that you're serving the same image to every device. So if you have, let's say, an 80K image, and a user on a kind of an edge, not a very good cell phone connection accesses your website, yes, the image will be scaled down visually, but they're still being served the full 80K. So it's not the most performant solution. So we have a few more solutions out there. Actually, this is just 3, and there are many, many, many more out there. The reason being is that there still is no perfect solution for today's implementation of flexible images. So there is no holy grail just yet. The W3C has actually formed a I believe they call it the Responsive Images Working Group, where they're trying to find and develop a native solution that can be native to the web browser. It's going to be some time, so we have all these different solutions. The reason why I mention these is that you may want to use a different solution depending on your project for different reasons. Now, if you have a small website and you're looking at the analytics and you don't have a lot of mobile users and they tend to have good connections, this is probably your best result. One reason being is it's the most user-friendly. From a Joomla point of view, you just insert the image and that's it. JCE editor by default, I believe, is configured out of the box not to insert width and height anymore. Because what happens if you don't insert width and height in your image tag? It just scales to the original image size. So it's not going to break. Add this one line of CSS to your template and you're set. You have flexible images. Yes?
I'm a little confused over this. My example, I have a flash slideshow. The images are, I don't set the image width and height, but they are.
It's the object tag. If it's a flash slideshow, it's likely the object tag has a fixed width and height, and if you're using an existing extension, it's most likely inserting or automatically detecting the width and height.
So what it comes out on the iPad is the full height, and then it skews everything else.
Yeah, if you look at the page source in your browser, likely you'll see a width and height attribute in the object tag. And this is where we have one difficulty with getting responsive web design in Joomla or anywhere else. A lot of extensions will do something tricky, like they'll try to think too much for you. And they'll do something like that. They'll automatically insert a width or height attribute. They may do JavaScript with some sort of auto detection. So that's where we have problems like this. So you do need control over those things. And it can be done. Seth Warburton, has anyone heard of Seth? I know, Paul, I know you know. I know you know Seth. Anyone else? Seth's out of the UK. So we have two people, that's great. Seth is big into responsive web design. He's big into a lot of this stuff. He's creating overrides for all these extensions to remove that kind of functionality. So it may require an override for the extension.
How do you find this?
What CSS supports object? What version?
That's an HTML tag. Object is HTML.
But you are using it in CSS.
Yes, I'm just styling it.
That will mean that any image will be converted. Will
No.
be shrunk.
No, what this is CSS 2.1, I believe.
It's 2.1.
Yep. So this works everywhere, and all this says is that every image on the website and every object cannot be wider than 100%. That's all that says.
And then the browser does resizing.
Yes, unless you're using Internet Explorer 6 and possibly 7, and then it goes. What do I do?
It's from 8, 9,
Yeah.
and all.
I think 7
From
might
7?
support it. I'm not sure.
What is Seth's name?
Seth Warburton. And actually, he's in this presentation later on, so I'll actually link to him. So,
Oh, good.
so the whole point here is that you need flexible images for a fully responsive website to work. So, to kind of review real quickly, the technical requirements for a responsive website, responsive web design, we have media queries, fluid grid, and flexible images. Those are our ingredients. And to steal Barb's line, we have our ingredients. And to kind of play on it, how do we make soup? So what do we do with this stuff? And this is where, going back 2.5, 3 months, thinking about my original presentation, this is where I said, you know what, this is not going to work to throw all this technical stuff, because people need to know, how do we approach this? How do we approach this technical stuff? So this is how we start approaching responsiveness. It's almost like enlightenment. So here's this quote: achieving responsiveness requires a mental shift, a different approach, a new way of thinking. Yeah, that quoted myself, but still, it does require it. I firmly believe and I advocate that responsive web design is as much a mental process and a workflow issue. So let's look at the root cause. And I have to admit, my wife hates me a lot of times because I'm always talking about root cause analysis. Well, why are we fighting? Well, let's look at the root cause. So let's look at the root cause of why are we even talking about responsive web design. So hopefully you can all see this. This is Luke. I'm not even going to try. W. Sorry? Robluski. Okay, I would have been closer than Ethan Marcotte. So back in January, Luke W. And I can say that because that's his Twitter handle. So
it's easy, Roblewski.
Yeah, easy for you. His tweet was, there are more iPhones. Now we're not talking mobile phones, we're talking just iPhones, one particular type of mobile phone. 402,000 were being sold a day. And yet, there are only 300,000 people being born a day. So think about that. I mean, that's amazing. And we're just talking about iPhones, and we're not even talking about tablets. We're not talking about smart TVs. It's just mind-boggling. So the point here is the web's changed. It is changing. And it's not even, mobile's the next big thing. Mobile is the big thing. It's more prevalent in third world countries where broadband and even dial-up doesn't even exist. But guess what? They all have cell phones. I can attest, I go to third world countries every now and then, mostly South America. Everyone has a cell phone. I see more cell phones down there than up here. It's amazing. So browsing habits, they aren't changing. They have changed already. So we have to start thinking differently about the web. And yes, I'm definitely on a soapbox right now, and I'm evangelizing, changing the way we think about the entire web. I admit it. And this is where we get to Seth. Seth Warburton, he created this really cool responsive, mobile-first HTML5 starter template called OneWeb. You can find it on his website. But one day, Seth tweeted, very eloquent, content first, mobile first, user first. It's a win-win. And this ties in really well to thinking responsively, thinking about how do we approach responsive web design. So I'm going to go against the grain here for a few minutes. Actually, for probably 30 minutes now. So let's think about design in a content-first approach. Back to Luke W. Robleski. Close? Okay, close enough. Not only is Luke a mobile advocate, he's a speaker, he goes around the world talking all these phenomenal events, but he also attends other people's talks, and he blogs about them. And on his website, he was blogging about a talk by, I think that's by Jeffrey Zeltman, Content First, and where he's talking about a design that understands and supports content is always going to be better. Absolutely. I mean, how many people here have worked with a designer, they come up with a comp, they show it to the client said, this is beautiful, I love this design. So you build out a website, and the website's there, it's empty. And you say, okay, go ahead, put in your content. And it doesn't work. Has anyone ever had that experience? Okay, so a few of us have. So that's like the old mentality to web design. We think about the visual aspects. How's it going to look, typically on desktop? And then we try to cram in all the content. See, mobile's everywhere. So the problem we're having is that, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there. So the point here is that design has to understand content. I'm going to take that one step further. I truly believe, and this is the way I practice my own development, my own business, I truly believe that we need to treat visual design now as a form of progressive enhancement. And I'm sure every designer in this room hates me right now. And I would too if I were you. But we have to approach things differently. We have to look at content first. Yes?
I'm sorry to keep asking.
No, it's okay.
I'm a freelancer. So
Me too.
I have a client. How do you re-educate the client to this concept? More so, the designers are going to get it, I believe. But the clients don't even understand web design.
Yep. That's a wonderful question. That's actually my next point. I have this process that I use, and I know other people use it. It's a content-first development process. You could call it CFD if you want, since we all love these acronyms. But as a freelancer, as a consultant, you also need to be an educator. and also an advocate. You need to tell your clients, this is the way we should do it, this is the way it works better. And you also need to be firm, and you can't be afraid to say no. I know it's really hard, but I will turn down projects now if a client refuses, if they're just, no, it has to be this design, this is the way it has to be. So that's great. Find someone else to do it, because it's not going to work. It might work for today, but you're going to call me back in 6 months and you're going to say, you know what, my website's not working, I'm on my iPhone, and it looks horrible, and they're going to be upset.
Yeah.
Well, that's where you have to put your foot down. And this is where we have to educate our clients. This is where we have to put our clients in a very uncomfortable position, and we have to focus on the content before anything else. And it's very uncomfortable for them. Because the client typically comes to you and say, I'd like a website. Great, I'd like it to be pink, and I want my logo up here, and I want to do this and that and everything else. And you say, wonderful. Now let's put all that aside. Let's talk about your messaging. Let's talk about why are you developing a website. Let's talk about the goal. And a lot of clients at that point go, really? Do we have to? I say, yes, we have to. Why are you building the website? What's the goal? What's the mission statement? Okay, and typically, it's pretty simple. Typically clients, once they get past that initial shock, they can, just like that. That's why we're building a website. One sentence or less usually. So you go, great, okay. So let's start writing the content. Let's start figuring out what are we going to say, what are we going to do in the website to support that goal. In a Joomla context, what I do is I say, great, we have this content. Because we have the content, we have the topics, I know what the categories are going to be. I know how to group that stuff together. Because we have our categories, I now know what the menu structure needs to be. Because we know what the message is, because we know what the content is with the categories, I know what extensions I need to support that message. You know, if their content consists of a lot of images, we may need an image gallery. Or if their goal of the website is some sort of user interaction where they have like an ongoing conversation with their clients, we say, okay, we might need a forum, or we might need some sort of discussion component of some sort. So we know all this stuff now because we focused on the message. We focused on the content first. In a Joomla context, I say, great, we have your content, we know your categories, we know your menu structure, we know your extensions. We build a website without any visual enhancement. So they have a really ugly website that consists of text and all their content. At this point, we have a website. The website's almost done. And I mentioned we deploy the supporting features, and then the last step is we say, okay, now let's bring in a designer. Let's look at the visual aspects of it, and we treat the visual design as a form of progressive enhancement. And I'll tell you right now, I know that every designer that I know that works in this process, they love it because they come in and they can just knock it out because it's so clear to them what the client's looking for. And we're actually going to talk about this even more about how to make it an even clearer process in a few minutes. So the whole point here is content first from a design perspective, visual design. Like we talked about Pocket, one of many services that will rip the content out of your website, rip it out of your design. We need to start looking at visual design as progressive enhancement. Use your content first. Oh, this is a link. I'm not sure if this is really appropriate. I wrote this presentation a couple years ago for high schools. I've been giving this talk, this slide right here, for about 1.5 years, I think now, at high schools. Teaching kids, I'm trying to change your minds early. You know, focus on content first. And you know, a lot of high schools are like, what? I want to get to the Flash. Like, no Flash. But anyway. So content first, fluidity. I mentioned fluidity before. This is a wonderful article that Luke W. He refers to quite often. And in this article, there's a quote, a core tenet of responsive web design, fluidity and proportion. So this is like a philosophical thing. We could ask questions. I was so excited I could actually ask him a question. And so I asked him, pixels or IMs for media queries? I knew the answer was IMs, but I didn't know why. I forgot his reasoning why. He said 2 reasons. You should use IMs for media queries. One, from a technical perspective, is they handle zooming better. On some browsers, on some devices, and this is kind of where we get into all the device compatibility, if your media queries use pixels and the user zooms in and out, it may or may not trigger the next breakpoint in the media query, because pixels are a very finite unit of measure. They are what they are, and that's it. IMs are proportional, so they'll scale. So you'll find that your website scales at better with zooming and scaling. So there's a good technical motivation to use IMs. This other point, and to be honest with you, when he said this, I was like, wow, man, that's really deep. It's very philosophical. But by using IMs instead of pixels, and you can use IMs everywhere. You can forget pixels. To be honest with you, I don't use pixels at all anymore. It's all about IMs. IMs force you to think about content versus device. IMs are a proportional unit of measure, and it's actually a typographical unit of measure. IMs, it's all about typography. It's all about content. So if you use IMs, you start thinking more about, well, how high is this paragraph? What's the font size I'm using here? You're thinking about the content. You're not thinking about, is this box 200 pixels? Because 200 pixel boxes really, well, they're going to go away. I think your fixed width elements, over time, you're going to see them disappearing more and more and more, and it's not going to be 200 pixels. It's going to be maybe 10 ems, or max width 10 ems, because we need to think about fluidity and content and proportion. So Seth's quote, back to Seth's quote, he said content first, mobile first, user first. So let's look at mobile first. Or in the case of Andy Clark, tiny screen first. Andy Clark has this little responsive mobile first boilerplate called 320 and up. He recently released version 2 of it. And this is where we're signifying like RWD 2.0. We're looking at responsive web design differently already in the last 2 years. His quote here is that he talks about his new version and how he's approaching a tiny screen first instead of the desktop down. Oh, how we laughed when we realized our mistake.
How does Bootstrap do that?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. We can find out maybe in a few minutes here. If we... No, it's okay.
I don't want to sidetrack.
No, it's okay. I really hope, I really hope they do mobile first. Because the whole point here is that back in the day, when we started doing responsive web design, we looked at the desktop first. We built for the desktop, and then we used media queries to kind of shoehorn things onto smaller screens. Didn't work very well. It worked, kind of, but it didn't work as well as doing mobile first CSS. So the way this works is our baseline CSS. Our initial CSS that we write is for this guy here. So the first lines of CSS that you write, your initial design that you implement, is for mobile devices. It's for the tiniest screen you can find. And then we use media queries to progressively enhance for larger screens and modern browsers that understand this enhancement. So this is where we get into browser compatibility, one aspect of it. There are certain browsers made by certain manufacturers that we don't need to name by name, but that older versions don't exactly understand media queries very well, or at all. So we have to think about making a decision here. Who are we going to serve, who are we not going to serve? Well, we can serve everyone. Because if it works on a mobile device, it will work on an older browser that doesn't understand media queries. Sure, it may not look like your desktop environment, but remember, we're getting away from the whole design perspective. We're focusing more on users, we're focusing more on content. And I mean, the reality is, those browsers that don't understand media queries are actually in the minority now. So, if we focus on mobile first, it will work more places better. So here's a little snippet of what that can look like. And it's really simple. This first part of our CSS applies to mobile devices. And then we start introducing media queries for larger screens. Make sense?
Why font size 76%?
That's a good question. You ready for some math? Body font size, 76%, is typically 12 pixels in most modern browsers, which tends to be a nice, attractive font size. And that's what I use. You don't have to. There's some recent discussions about, well, we shouldn't change the body font size. I'm still waiting for some really serious hardcore evidence to change that. But you don't have to. This is just an example.
Yeah, well,
But the point here is that your CSS that you first write should work on the mobile device. You're targeting the mobile device first. You're designing for this screen. And then you're progressively enhancing for larger screens and modern browsers that understand media queries. Oh, this is where I'm supposed to do my yoga tree pose, meditative focus thing. When you look at mobile first, when you look at the tiny screen for this, it generates focus. And for those of us that work with clients, forcing focus, you tell the client, it has to fit on here. The clients will say, then you ask the client, what's really important? What is the most important thing? And that's where mobile first helps. It helps you focus on the things that matter most. Brad Frost, he wrote this great article, Many Faces of Mobile First. He says, mobile first force us to focus on the constraints of the mobile medium and what really matters the most. And that's really important. And what that is 80% less. So when you focus on mobile first, you're dealing with 80% less. So Luke, the way he put it was that when you design for mobile first, 80% of the content, navigation, promotions, and interactions need to go, and that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, how great is that? You have 80% less because it generates focus. So basically what this does is this forces you to have a very concise, to-the-point website on mobile devices. And when you start with a very concise, to-the-point message, and you start progressively enhancing it, you'll find that your websites are cleaner. You'll find that they're more cohesive. You'll find that you won't have all this extra stuff that you're shoehorning everywhere. And this is really where everything leads up to. I'm curious, who here thinks, well, actually I want to hear some guesses. The other day I Googled user first design. How many hits do you think I got? Anyone?
5.
Nope. Anyone?
5 million.
0.
Yeah.
0. I mean, come on.
You're not even optimizing for it?
Yeah, well, come on. User first, I mean, that didn't even come up. There's all this other stuff, but I mean, isn't this why we're building websites? Who here builds a website for something other than the user? Anyone? Kind of.
I got into an argument over who the users were, whether it was existing customers or new customers, and that pretty much shut down the website right there.
But still for users, though, right?
In the end, it wound up being for the people who built the site for themselves, and that was the real problem.
Oh, okay. So okay, a self-gratifying website. But
Some people build it for Google.
But that's a great example. But it's still for the user, for a different user. The point is, this is why we build websites, right? I don't know anyone who builds a website for something other than a user. So we should focus on the users, right? Why do we, traditionally, when we start a web development process, why do we look at pictures of what the website, what we think it should look like? Why don't we start with, why don't we start looking at, well, who's the user? What do they want? What do we need? What's the message that the user cares about? Yes?
I think mainly because your client thinks they know who their users are.
Exactly. Exactly, and that brings us back to, as consultants, as freelancers, we need to educate the client. I mean, I'll be honest, this is as much as a hearts and minds campaign than anything else. But it's about users, and if you want a successful, sustaining website that works everywhere, you need to think about the users first. So the whole point here, websites are created to convey a message, provide a gateway to interaction. They have to think about the users first. If you really want a successful, especially responsive website, think about the users, please. Think about progressive enhancement. This is where I get the bash on Twitter Bootstrap. I'm so critical of Twitter Bootstrap right now. Graceful degradation. What do you think happens, as of last week, if you go to a Twitter Bootstrap website on a mobile device with JavaScript disabled?
Not sure.
Anyone? Nothing. You get this little box in the corner. Oh, cool. I guess I click here, right? Wrong. It doesn't work. Twitter Bootstrap fails with JavaScript disabled. They hide the menu with JavaScript. They only show it with JavaScript. There is no graceful degradation. I recently looked at a website 2 days ago that just launched. Brand new website. Beautiful website. I turn off JavaScript. Literally, I saw a logo, 5 menu items, and that's it. No content.
So for Bootstrap, in a perfect world, if you could just wave your magic wand, since Joomla is using Bootstrap,
Yes.
I mean, what would the solution be? Is there another set of CSS that deals with if you don't have JavaScript?
Yes. It's a different way of thinking about it. I can actually show you on the Construct Framework website where it's done right, in my opinion. And this is definitely, I am on a big soapbox right now. I will admit it. But what Bootstrap does is, when you're on a small screen, it hides the menu items. And it uses JavaScript to display them. In my opinion, you should use JavaScript to reposition an element on the screen that's already on the screen in a hidden fashion. So if there is no JavaScript, guess what? That element's back on the screen. If you look at sets, one web template, or if you look at, oh, I should also admit I am the developer of the Construct Framework. It's not why I'm here today, but it is progressively enhanced. It does use graceful degradation and responsive and all that good stuff. But if you look at the website, when you're on a small screen, the navigation drops to the bottom of the page, where it's out of the view of the user. And you get a little button, like in Bootstrap. You click that button, whoop, drops it to the bottom of the page where you have all your menu items. So we could use JavaScript at that point to hide that and make it beautiful and slide down and fade in, that kind of good stuff. But we definitely need to think about these things. Because I know a lot of people say, well, there aren't that many people out there that surf the web without JavaScript. That's true. But there are, you'd be surprised how many people that disable JavaScript on their cell phones so they can save that bandwidth. Especially in developing countries where sometimes the connections aren't that great. People do things like that to save a little bandwidth and loading time. How am I in time?
Okay.
Okay, okay. So the point here, we have to think about the users. Think about progressive enhancement, think about graceful degradation. If you start content first and you start with text and you progressively enhance it with a visual design, your JavaScripts and other things that should gracefully degrade will happen in a progressive manner. Does that make sense? The other thing, and I mean, these things deserve their own talks in themselves, but think web accessibility. Now that we have HTML5, which is pretty much here, it's widespread, it's prevalent, HTML5 provides an easier way of implementing more web accessibility. There is the role attribute. One attribute. If you add this one attribute in HTML5 role, such as navigation, for example, you're increasing your web accessibility. So, and I know this is kind of an aside here, but this is all related to user first. I know it's not necessarily something about responsive web design, but it's about putting users first, which in my opinion is what responsive web design is all about. So think about web accessibility. So to kind of sum things up real quick here, like I just said, responsive web design is more than media queries, fluid grids, and flexible images. It's about a different way of thinking. It's about a different workflow. I think it's about a different way of approaching the entire web development process. So we talked about approaching your content before design. Use visual design as progressive enhancement. Develop for mobile first. If your CSS starts with mobile devices and then you progressively enhance for media queries, your site will work more places better. Basically, it'll work everywhere. And maximize the user experience and accessibility. So if I were put on the spot and I had to sum this up with one sentence or less, or exactly one sentence, I would say responsive web design is about doing everything you can do to put the user in control of their experience. And if you do that, you'll have a more successful, more accessible, more responsive website than a situation where you block that ability. So on that note, I will leave you with a short list. There's actually more things down here. And this is one reason why I stepped away from all the technical stuff. These are all experts on these topics. I'm just a messenger. I'm just kind of an evangelist of these things. This is a beautiful presentation of the big video that changed the world of Ethan Marcotte.
No flexibility.
Yes. And this is a 7-minute video on YouTube that basically sums up a lot of what I talked about. But these are all great resources that if you have time and if you're going to jump in these things, definitely check them out. All the links throughout my talk, all these blue links in here, like here, these are all the different articles that talk about these different things contextually. So for all these links, just make sure you go to betweenbrain.com/talks/RWD. You can look me up on GitHub. You can even fork this presentation if you want. I accept all requests. So on that note, I will thank you for your time. I will thank you for your patience. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer each and every one of them.
The animation you use on this page is?
Oh, this is the Reveal. This is the Reveal JavaScript library.
What is it called?
Reveal.
Reveal?
Yes. It's really available on GitHub.
How is it spelled?
Reveal, R-E-V-E-A-L. And it's HTML5 and we're breaking it.
Yeah, could you get a little specific in terms of Joomla? If I wanted to start a brand new responsive website, where would I go? What would I do that's different?
Well, in context of Joomla, a good place to start is with a responsive template. I mentioned Seth Warburton has the OneWeb template. I linked to Seth's website in the presentation. So if you go to his website, you'll see a link to the project page for OneWeb. And it's a starter template that you build on top of. You have to write code. I did the same thing in Construct Framework. We have a responsive grid in there now. I think Joomla, is that right? Joomla has responsive templates now, off-the-shelf templates, and
Rocket.
Which version?
Rocket theme.
Which version, Joomla?
2.5, I believe. I believe 2.5.
Responsive templates?
Yes, but these are all third-party templates. So that's a good place to start. Once you get beyond that, it depends on the extension. Some extensions are really great. They just kind of drop in and work. Some need overriding, so you might need to learn about template overrides to change the code. Or we mentioned that the Flash presentation where there's a width and height attribute probably are automatically inserted. So you might need to overwrite those extensions to remove that functionality. That's where I'd start. And of course, I would start content first, and start writing your CSS for mobile sites first. Yes.
When I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about things on the page just getting bigger and smaller and content flowing. Is there any consideration for when there's more real estate actually serving up different groupings of content?
That is a great question. The question is, when we have more real estate, should we look at serving more content? That's a great question. And I hate to give you this answer, but it depends. It's funny because a couple of weeks ago, somebody on Twitter mentioned, something about using certain classes in Bootstrap to hide elements from mobile devices. My response to them is, well, if you have to hide it from mobile, it probably doesn't need to be on your website. Why is it there? Is there content on your website that wouldn't apply to mobile devices? Or mobile users wouldn't want? And these are questions you have to ask yourself.
You're talking about deleting content. I'm talking about, if I was out and I was getting sushi and I ordered just a few pieces,
yes,
it would come on a little plate. If I wanted a lot of sushi, it might come in a big plate and all
exactly.
the pieces would be together rather than a lot of little plates.
Yeah.
Is there any thinking along those lines?
There absolutely is. there is a lot of thinking along that, and it really depends on the website. And this is where one thing, and I wasn't planning on talking about this, one thing about responsive web design is you need to figure out, is this even the right approach for the website? Now, I hate to say this, but responsive web design is not a cure-all. It doesn't fit on every website. Back in my resources, there's this article, Nielsen versus Clark. They're both wrong. This is an article by Jason Mark. He's out of Massachusetts. His company, Gravity Switch. They're all about mobile. They do a lot of WordPress. They also do Joomla. But they do a lot of mobile and mobile experience. And Jason talks about different mobile strategies. And responsive web design may not be the right strategy for that particular website. And that's where we get to looking at the analytics, looking at the user behavior, looking at your strategies, your goals. So it really depends. I hate to give you a non-committal answer, but yes?
So with we're working on the PR that's going to come out for Joomla 3.0, right?
Yes.
And kind of arm wrestled with our PR firm over some of the wording, a
Sure.
lot of the wording. What we sort of have settled on for now is that Joomla is the world's first major CMS to come out with, mobile-friendly support in the core.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that tug of war was, we didn't, at one point we didn't have world's first major, it was just world's first CMS, and I kind of said, yeah, that's probably not true. There's probably some little small one. That's part of where, is somebody from WordPress or Drupal going to say, well, wait a minute, we already got that. If you install this theme or this template.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And I don't know for a fact, but I will bet money that probably somebody has something you can install.
WordPress 2011, 2012, out of the box.
Yeah, out of the box, okay. Yeah.
Okay. In the core. I go and download it and install it, it's there. Okay. So we're probably not accurate saying we're the world's first major CMS to have a mobile friendly support.
Probably not. Probably not. Nice try though.
Well, I'm sorry too, but I'd rather know the truth than to put something on a PR.
Exactly. And there's a fine line there because you're talking about in the core and installable. We've been doing responsive since Joomla 1.5, technically.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Good. Is there if I was a new web person,
yes,
and new site builder web person, and somebody said, I want you to build me a mobile first site, pick a content management system.
Okay.
Let's not say we're all Joomla advocates. But is there a CMS out there that really kicks tail when it comes to full responsive support the way you think it ought to be? Is there somebody we ought to be copying or following or looking to as a leader is kind of where I'm going with it.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. I can't say I can give you the best answer because I don't know all the CMSs.
Yeah.
However, there are other CMSs that do it better, but they require more work, like ModX, for example.
Yeah.
If you install ModX and you type a word in the page and you look at the page source, there's zero code in the page. There are no JavaScript libraries automatically loaded. So out of the box, ModX, and this is actually the same approach Melage's taking, is to remove all this stuff, take all that stuff out of your way, and put all those elements in the control of the designer and the developer, the implementer. Of course, that requires a lot more work. So there's a fine line, there's a balance of ease of use, ease of implementation, versus being lightweight out of the core. Honestly, I don't think there's any way you can answer that question accurately, because you can't say, you have to.
Yeah. Too many use cases and too many.
You have to quantify what's best.
Right.
Like for example, I looked at ModX, I was looking at it for a few hours going, okay, this is intense, but in the fact that I have to build out all this stuff from scratch, but it will be a handcrafted exactly the way I want it out of the box, which is cool, but I need a client that wants that, that's willing to pay for that, and in a practical business perspective.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so hope that helps.
Yeah.
There was a question, I think, in the back. Yes.
I was going to ask, I had a website that I built a long time ago, back in
Mhm.
Joomla 1.0, it was gradually progressed. It was not mobile friendly by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
And a couple of months ago, I had that oh shit realization, I have to do something.
Yes.
I wound up going with, I think it's Joomla.
Joomla Mobile.
Joomla Mobile.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on using that as almost like a branch or a fork of the site, rather than actually making it native? Is that something you can do?
Well,
are you okay with that, or?
No. I'm going to tell you how you should build your web. No. No, this goes back to his question. How do you do it? And this kind of goes back to mobile strategy. If you go to betweenbrain.com right now today, on a mobile device, you will not get a responsive website. Simply because the shoemaker always has holes in the shoes. I forgot the saying. But I, in Construct Framework, which is my template framework, I used to load jQuery Mobile as a mobile optimized experience, which worked. And that's kind of like what Joomla Mobile does, basically. And it works. You plug it in, boom, you're done. Zero effort. It's beautiful. But then to get responsive, it takes more work. I haven't had time to make my site responsive. Construct Framework is touting responsiveness, so it should be responsive. Once again, it goes back to mobile strategy. It goes back to the constraints of the project. It goes back to what your mobile users, who they are, what they're looking for, their capabilities. It's a really complicated situation. Yes?
Did you mention the difference between device-dependent versus responsive?
No, I did not get into devices because...
Well, just because mobile Joomla, isn't that
yes.
considered device-dependent?
Horribly so.
You're basically creating a template based on if it's an iPhone or it's a tablet. You
yes.
basically have the capability of creating different templates based on the device they're using. The
right.
problem is there's 6 gazillion devices out there. So that's a concern.
Wordful.
Yeah.
I don't know anymore if they do this, but the original versions of Joomla Mobile used to use Wordful, which is, it's an acronym, W-U-R-F-L. Wordful, the full Wordful library has all these different detections for different device capability. And a couple of years ago, I think we were talking at 400 or 500 different types of devices. The database for Wordful at the time was over 25 megabytes. There was, and I don't know if it was Joomla Mobile, it might have been Joomla Mobile. They use that database. So when you installed it on your website, you just added 25 megabytes of data to your database that your website had to parse through and process every time someone went to your website. Talk about lack of performance. And this is where we get to device detection. Device detection, yeah, it works, and it may work great for your situation. You may be in a situation to where, for whatever reason, you have to serve up something special just for iPads. Whatever, but you might need to do that. So that's where we get into device detection. The problem with device detection is that it's complicated, it's not necessarily performant, it can fail. I can very easily change my browser user agent, and let's say I'll pretend like I'm a Google bot. Hey, look, I just bypassed all your security because I'm pretending to be a different device. People do that all the time. So device detection can easily fail, but it may work best for your particular situation. Responsive web design, we don't care about what device you're on. What we care about is we're going to make it work everywhere. You know, it's like a happy, friendly, we love everyone. So everyone's going to get all the content or get a different experience. Does that kind of answer that, address that situation? Yes, Barb.
I was working on a responsive site last year, and before OneWeb was available and so on, and came up with a way to kind of use both.
Okay, yeah.
So CSS and media queries delivering different styles, but there is JBrowser, which is in the core of Joomla, and I have my engineer write me a little bit of code that would examine that and basically say, what are you? And depending on sort of categories of things, return a variable that I can use in naming module positions. So if you're with me, ask what kind of device are you, and determine if you're a tablet or a mobile, and if not, we're going to call you big. So I have this variable that gets returned in the head of my document, and then I create a module position, slideshow hyphen echo that variable. Slideshow hyphen echo that. So depending on the device, the module position that gets written is module position slideshow big, module position slideshow tablet, module position slideshow mobile, and then set up 3 different modules. And they won't be on top of each other, and I won't be loading something and then saying, oh, but don't show it. I won't be loading a 960 pixel slideshow, which is like, 4, 5, 10 big images onto the phone. I'm just loading a little one.
Exactly.
So it's a combination of responsive design and device detection that I think has some promise, and would actually like to work with more people on making it better. But
Absolutely. There is a PHP script out there, library called imdetect. Imdetect.
Like mobile detect?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, you know what I can do here? Well, there is, his name is Anthony Hands. Really nice guy. I'm going to try to find it. Oh, yep, mobile ESP. That's it. This is a really phenomenal script. Anthony Hand is a mobile device specialist. He creates user interfaces for mobile devices. This is a PHP script. This is what I use in Construct Framework when we're doing jQuery mobile. And I mean, he has different touch devices. I'm going to try to find the list here real quick.
And this is open source?
This is open source. So here's just a short list: WebKit, iPhone, iPod, iPad, Macintosh, Android, Google TV, Zoom, Zoom with X, the Zoom device, HTC Flyer, Nuvi phone, da 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 da. He does all this device detection here in this one script. So you can include that in your template, and then you can just say, check for, is it device when phone 7 die, for example. Something like that. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. That was just on the spot there. But yes, you could do something like that. Mobile strategy. And this is where, I hate to say it, responsive web design may not be the ultimate solution for your particular project. Sorry, you work for Microsoft. I shouldn't say
No, I
that.
have a question.
Okay, yeah.
I just included that comment, but...
Okay, well, and
No.
I used to have one of those, so
Yeah.
that's why I said that.
So this is like a question about responsive web design. So obviously, you can go responsive or, mobile templates versus the desktop.
Yep.
But in general, there is forget all the different screen resolution, which is what responsive deals with.
Yep.
There's a general distinction between mobile and, let's say, tablet or desktop in terms of vertically oriented versus horizontally.
Yes.
So with responsive, is there already design patterns or templates that show up and say, maybe we have horizontal navigation versus vertical, which is common because I do want to be able to go between the two without having my different quote-unquote forked versions. But it is a different UI.
Well, you can do that with media queries. There is. All right, here we go. Come on. You need to fast forward here. Actually, you know what? There is I forget. Media feature orientation. You can do landscape or portrait. So you could do media type screen and orientation landscape and min width 320 or 480. So you can do an expression like that with your media query, and then have a whole set of CSS for that particular situation. So you can combine these media features. So you could do portrait and min width or max width, 320 by 480 or something like that. So yeah, you could do that with CSS, absolutely, with media queries. You could also do it with sniffing the browser agent. I believe Modernizer. There's a Modernizer JavaScript library which does device detection.
Do some of the templates do that automatically? That was the question.
Oh, I don't.
Template off the shelf that does that automatically.
I don't.
Joomla art,
I don't know.
the Joomla art, they created a free responsive template. Now, it's not necessarily the portrait versus landscape, but what it does is, like, let's say you have a menu going across.
Yep.
When the screen shrinks, it automatically makes the menu vertical, going down. It does it automatically. So Joom
Yeah.
was one of our sponsors.
Yeah.
No, but even forget that. They did, for me, I was looking to find the difference between responsive and device dependent. So I looked at mobile Joomla, and I did the same test that all of us are struggling with. And the Joomla art, they have a free, if you go to joomlaart.com, and they have a free template. I just don't remember what it is. And you can actually see it happen in action.
JA wall.
JA wall.
I'm pretty sure it's the wall, and that they use. And this is where we get into a different strategy for mobile.
Sure,
they use jQuery plugin, the Masonry plugin. Masonry plugin. One of my pet peeves. If they're a sponsor, I'll be nice. But they're using a JavaScript solution to reposition page elements, which is great. I mean, and that works if that fits your mobile strategy. And it sounds like, well, you could do that with CSS. You could do that with media queries. That wouldn't be hard. Out of the box, I don't know other than that one. I don't know them. I think right now the responsive templates kind of take it to one extreme or the other, and we're kind of talking a hybrid case. No.
Barb, do you know of another one?
I know. Like Seth's, for example, his is pure HTML. He doesn't use any JavaScript. It's super lightweight.
I've been working with the OneWeb as a starting point for
And so,
my work now.
so there's one I've used is Strapped by, and that's a free one by, I want to say RW Design. Does that ring a bell? I'll find it. HWD. I think.
Oh yeah, yes.
So that's one I've used, and the Joomla 3.0 is going to have a responsive template included with it called Protostore. We'll take a look at that later this afternoon.
And there's Philip Block, Juicestrap, I think it is. I think 2.5, right? His are 2.5 compatible. So Philip Block put out a Bootstrap-based series of templates, I believe. So those are, I believe they're all responsive, and he's working with, I know his Twitter handle, PHP Roberto, some different developers to create other responsive, mobile-friendly templates. Yes.
One more point, if you go to a responsive template, you also need to find responsive components that play nice with that.
Yes.
And I'm seeing RS Horns is coming out with stuff.
Yep.
I think even JFNs. So when you're looking at your components, I'm not saying which way you have to go, but just keep in mind that some of them are moving in that direction, will play nicer depending on the template that you're displaying. Because if the component doesn't play with it, your screen's going to look all fugly anyway.
Yeah, then you have to start overriding. And that's what, like Seth, for example, I remember he was on Twitter a while ago. He completely overrode the entire Red Shop, all the views. Made Red Shop 100% responsive. Took him weeks for one extension, but he did it. That's the kind of guy Seth is. He will do it. But he created overrides for the entire thing of all of Red Shop. So you're absolutely right. You need to find extensions that are responsive, or make that investment yourself of making them responsive with template overrides.
I think it's a great point. I know that I've read blog posts and forum threads with the group that's working on the Bootstrap integration with Joomla that there's going to develop documentation so that extension developers will know what those best practices are, so that they don't have to mess with the CSS and the design aspects. If they just follow the best practices that will hopefully be documented, then guys like Seth won't have to spend weeks, doing overrides.
Absolutely.
That's the goal.
I have a suggestion, then. In the JED, wouldn't it be better to give an extra point for responsiveness of the extensions so that we know which ones are
If I was benevolent dictator for life, the answer would be yes.
That has been discussed. I've seen discussion on that. I don't know how far it's gone.
Because I would think, I mean, I'm not a programmer, and I come at this from the user perspective, and I have no clue.
Sure.
Yeah. So it'd be wonderful if Joomla put out that service.
Absolutely. And it's a serious problem, too, because when you create a template override, you're copying what they're providing a snapshot at that point in time. So those things change. Even in the Joomla core, if you're writing the core, if the core changes that layout, you might miss functionality or something might break. So having to override all those things for responsiveness, even though the core is responsive, for third-party templates to override those things, we're getting into a very sticky situation. And a lot of us have been talking about creating like a GitHub repository where we can share those overrides, hopefully share responsibility for keeping them up to date. Ultimately, we would love to develop the overrides and send them back to the original developers so they can implement them in the core of their extension. But with 9,000 extensions on the JED, it's a huge undertaking. So, you know, as the web evolves, so do we. And you're right, we have to find extensions that work responsibly or create those overrides. If you do create the overrides, I highly recommend you contact the original developer and say, hey, this is what I did. Would you like them? A lot of times they'll go, yes, we want them, please. So, sorry. Any other questions or comments or points or? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your